does it really mean to fear God? Well, in order to answer this question, we need to examine the expression fear God and also the expression fear of the Lord as it's found in all of the Bible. Perhaps you know that the book of Revelation contains over 1,000 references to the Old Testament alone, which means that Revelation is getting much of its information from all of the rest of Scripture, from all of the rest of the Bible. So if we want to know what the first angel's message means when it says, fear God, we need to see what that expression means in the rest of Scripture. You see, the expression, the fear of God or the fear of the Lord, is like a many-edged diamond. Each edge is a different aspect of what it means to fear God. So we must look at the entire biblical testimony about this expression or these expressions. Now, by definition, the expression fear God or the fear of the Lord involves respect, awe, reverence, and worship towards God. And the reason why we are to have this respect, this awe, this reverence, and this spirit of worship for God is because He is our Creator and we are His creatures. Notice Psalm 33 and verses 6 through 9 where this is brought out clearly. Psalm 33 verses 6 through 9. It says there, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. Notice creation. And all the host of them by the breath of His mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deep in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the earth were inhabitants of the world stand in awe of Him. So why are we supposed to fear the Lord and stand in awe of the Lord? It's simply because God is the what? The Creator, and we are creatures. Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 6 through 10. Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 6 through 10 adds to this idea. It says there, inasmuch as there is none like you, Jeremiah is describing God, there's none like you, O Lord, you are great, and your name is great in might. Who would not fear you, O King of the nations? For this is your rightful due. For among all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. So reverence and awe for God, fearing God, has to do with who He is. He's the great God. He is the Creator of the heavens and of the earth. In fact, I found this interesting statement. It's very short. It's in the beautiful and magnificent book on how to bring up children. It's called Child Guidance. On page 538, we find this definition of what it means to fear God. True reverence for God is inspired by a sense of His infinite greatness and a realization of His presence. In other words, the reason we fear God is because we discern His infinite greatness and we also realize that He is present. But you know, the fear of the Lord is an interesting phenomenon. To fear God is an interesting phenomenon because it has to do with God being distant and at the same time with God being close. In other words, God is transcendent, but God is also immanent. God is over and above His creation, but God comes in contact with His creation. You know, the great writer Rudolf Otto once said that God is the holy other. In other words, we should not conceive of God as our good old buddy. We can't conceive of God as the man upstairs. God is a God who is great, omnipotent, and He must be respected. He's up there. He's over and above us. He's outside of us. He is transcendent. But the Bible also tells us that God comes into close contact with those who are humble of heart. In other words, He's a God that's way up there. He is to be respected. He is to be held in awe. He is to be honored. But at the same time, those who are humble, God comes down and He has contact with them. That's why we can fear God and at the same time have joy. Notice Isaiah 57 and verse 15, where we find this apparent dichotomy between God's otherness and God's coming to be with us. Isaiah 57 verse 15. For thus says the high and lofty one, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place. Notice God says, I'm up there. I'm beyond the sun, the moon, and the stars. I inhabit eternity. But then notice what He says. I dwell in the high and holy place with him who has a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. So God is way up there. He's transcendent, but He is also immanent. He is to be respected because He's outside of us. He's the great Creator, but He's the Creator who is our Father and comes in contact with us. And so, when we fear God, we respect Him as the omnipotent God, but at the same time we love Him as our intimate Father. Now, let's talk a little bit about that intimate closeness that God has to us. Notice Deuteronomy chapter 13 and verse 4. And what I want you to see in this verse is the number of synonyms that are used to describe our relationship with God. Deuteronomy 13 and verse 4. Notice what it says. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear Him and keep His commandments and obey His voice. You shall serve Him and hold fast to Him. Do you see all of the synonymous expressions? To fear God means to walk with Him, to keep His commandments, to obey His voice, to serve Him, and to hold fast to Him. By the way, that expression, hold fast to Him, really in the King James Version, I'm using the New King James, but in the King James Version, it's translated to cleave. You shall cleave to Him. Now that's the very same word that's used in Genesis where it speaks about a man leaving his father and his mother and joining his wife and cleaving unto her. In other words, it's an intimate closeness. It's actually becoming one according to Scripture. By the way, the same word is used in Psalm 102 verse 5 where it speaks about the bones cleaving to the skin. And it's used in Psalm 137 verse 6 where it speaks about the tongue cleaving to the roof of your mouth. In other words, this is an intimate closeness. It's a sticking together. And God says, this is what the fear of the Lord means. It means to cleave unto the Lord your God. Fearing God also involves respecting God's holy name. Notice Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verses 58 and 59. Deuteronomy 28 and verses 58 and 59. Here God is warning Israel about the need to respect His holy name, which, by the way, is a reflection of His character. God's name and His character are interchangeable. When you trample on God's name, you're really trampling upon His character. It says in Deuteronomy 28 verses 58 and 59, God is speaking, if you do not carefully observe all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, the Lord your God, then the Lord will bring upon you and your descendants extraordinary plagues, great and prolonged plagues, and serious and prolonged sicknesses. Notice that God expects that we should what? Fear His glorious and awesome name, and His awesome name is the Lord your God. Notice Psalm 111 and verse 9, also about respecting the holy name of God. In other words, we should not unnecessarily repeat the name of God. It should not become common on our lips. Psalm 111 verse 9, it says there, He has sent redemption to His people. He has commanded His covenant forever. Holy and awesome is His name. And of course, we all know that the third commandment in Exodus 20 and verse 7 says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. In other words, don't use it unnecessarily. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes His name in vain. And of course, we're all acquainted with the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9 says, hallowed be your what? Be your name. The word hallowed means sanctified be your name. Your name is holy. You know, I think that Hollywood would do real well to listen to this. Because in the movies that are produced by the media, God's name is constantly taken in vain. Not only this, we do it also many times as Christians when we use slang words to describe Jesus or to describe God. We say, for example, G, which is short for Jesus. And we say, gosh, and I say this reverently, to make a point. We say, gosh, it's a slang word for God. You know, the Jews did not even pronounce God's holy name because it was so magnificent. They actually only wrote it. They never even pronounced it with their lips because it was such a holy and reverent name. How many times don't we just basically repeat the name of God in our prayers, the name of God in our conversation without taking into account the reverent and awesome and omnipotent meaning of that holy name of God?